Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this webinar about our new older adult restorative justice program at CARIE. My name is Shannon Graham, and I work as a victim advocate and restorative justice advocate at CARIE. I want to let you all know that you are muted for this webinar and your video will be turned off for the duration. Please feel free to put any questions or comments you may have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be answering any questions at the end of the webinar. I also want to let you know that the PowerPoint slides, as well as the recording of the webinar, will be available and emailed to everyone when the webinar is over today. Today, I'm joined by Katie Mowrer from CARIE and Sue Wasserkrug from Good Shepherd Mediation, and we will be discussing what restorative justice is, how our program works, and then we'll be joined by some of our colleagues to demonstrate a role play of a restorative justice process to show you how our program plays out in a real-life scenario. Right, so let's get started. The Restorative Justice Program is a partnership between CARIE and Good Shepherd Mediation Program. Here at CARIE, we are an advocacy nonprofit and we work with older adults aged 60 and older on a variety of needs and issues. CARIE stands for the Center for Advocacy for the Rights and Interests of the Elderly. CARIE was founded in 1977 by a coalition of groups and individuals and has worked to become a leader in providing direct assistance to the elderly, their families, and professionals in the aging field. CARIE fulfills its core mission to improve the well-being, rights, and autonomy of older adults through advocacy, education, and action through a case-to-cause model that serves to promote equal access to justice and addresses problems and issues on an individual and systems level of change. Some of the different programs at CARIE are the Ombudsman Program, where our advocates help individuals in nursing and personal care homes with complaint resolution and resident rights representation. Our Senior Medicare Patrol works to protect Medicare and Medicare beneficiaries from healthcare fraud and abuse. Our CARIE program is a free telephone and online consultation service providing information and resolving problems for older adults and those that care for them. And lastly, our PAY program is our victim advocacy program that provides court accompaniment and advocacy for older adult Philadelphians who are victims of crime or abuse. Our PAY program is where the older adult restorative justice program is primarily centralized. Now, Sue is going to discuss Good Shepherd Mediation Program.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sue Wasserkrug. I'm a program administrator at Good Shepherd Mediation Program. We are a community justice center serving Philadelphia and surrounding counties. We've been around since 1984. We were founded by an order of nuns, actually, the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, who had been serving the community mostly in the Germantown area of Philadelphia, providing services to troubled girls, I believe, for about 100 years before we actually were founded. And that work ended, and the sisters did a needs assessment within the neighborhood and found out that partly because of the diversity of the community, there was a need for some place where neighbors could go to resolve disputes that they didn't necessarily want to take to court. It could be neighbor disputes, it could be disputes involving youth, youth incidents. And so the Good Shepherd Mediation Program was founded. Even though we are sort of associated with an order of nuns, I just always like to point out that we are a completely independent and secular nonprofit organization. And you can see here our mission is to encourage peace, reconciliation, and social justice, and to empower individuals to resolve their conflicts. We do this through a number of services. We do mediation and facilitation for individuals and groups that have conflicts or disputes among themselves that they want to resolve in a way where they can have a say in the process. That's sort of the defining feature in mediation. It's a process for resolving disputes where the parties actually create the solution with the assistance of a neutral third party who's the mediator. And in addition, mediation is generally the term we use if it's two parties having a conflict. Facilitation is a much broader term for larger groups. Restorative practices are a little bit different. They are usually processes that involve some sort of harm that has occurred to an individual or a group or a community. And restorative practices are a way of kind of addressing that harm and healing the harm so that the parties can move forward. And that's mostly what we're going to be talking about today. And then we also do a lot of training and consulting. We do basic mediation training, introduction, we do restorative practices training. We do a lot of just related types of workshops. For example, we recently did a workshop on nonviolent communication. Then we do a lot of consulting where organizations might come to us and have us come in and do a workshop on various conflict related topics like communication and conflict resolution, things like that. So that's a little bit about us. Thanks, Shannon.
All right, so now I'm going to talk about what restorative justice is in terms of theory and in practice. So Howard Zurb wrote the Little Book of Restorative Justice, and there's a quote at the top there from the book, and it reads, "Restorative justice is a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in the specific offense and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible." To dive into that quote a little further, restorative justice emerged in the 1970s as an effort to correct some of the weaknesses of the Western legal system while building on its strengths. As an area of special concern, has been the neglect of victims and their needs. Legal justice is largely about what to do with offenders. It has also been driven by a desire to hold offenders truly accountable. Recognizing that punishment is often ineffective, restorative justice aims at helping offenders to recognize the harm they have caused and encouraging them to repair the harm to the extent that is possible. Rather than obsessing about whether offenders get what they deserve, restorative justice focuses on repairing the harm of the crime and engaging individuals and community members in the process. So here we have a chart that shows and compares retributive justice to restorative justice. And this shows that in the first, that crime in our criminal justice system now is seen as an act against the state and its laws. The state's control of crime and how it is repaired, where in restorative justice processes, crime is seen as an act against people and relationships, and crime control lies primarily in the community and the individual that was harmed. In terms of accountability for the crime that has occurred in the criminal justice system now, this is seen as punishment. In restorative justice processes, accountability is taking responsibility for the crime and working to repair the harm between the individual or community that was affected. Where justice is seen as shaming, blaming, and establishing guilt in our criminal justice system, restorative justice practices to see justice as focusing on understanding, resolving problems, accepting accountability, and preventing problems in the future. The biggest difference between these systems we can see in the last point in the table by who is centralized in the justice process. In the criminal justice system, the process is dominated by state professionals that represent the community in the legal process, and they are not the people who are directly impacted by the offense. Restorative justice aims to involve those who have been directly harmed by the offender or who were involved in the harmful situation that has occurred. So simply, what is restorative justice in practice? At its most basic, it's a facilitated meeting, sometimes more than one depending on the situation, between those most affected by a situation in order to find a resolution together. So now moving on to how our program actually works. As previously mentioned, it focuses on victims or older adults over the age of 60. We are aiming to address cases that may normally fall through the cracks where seniors do not want to go through the criminal justice system or may not feel comfortable, but still need an environment to address the harm that has occurred. So if you come across any seniors in your organizations that share any concerns that could benefit from a restorative justice process, we at CARIE would then take that referral from you and reach out to the senior to further explain the program in full. If the situation is appropriate for restorative justice, we would then refer them over to Good Shepherd Mediation and Sue, where they will do their own screening process and further explain the details of meeting with the victims. From there, Good Shepherd will also reach out to the offending party separately to hear their side of things and then work with both parties to determine the restorative justice process that is needed and how many meetings will need to occur. CARIE will then act as an advocate for the senior and be there for them through the restorative justice process in any capacity that they want or see fit. This could range from little to no involvement, if that's what they wish, or if they do not have any supports in their life at the moment, Katie or I could be that support for them. We could attend the meetings with them, debrief them over the phone after the meetings are over, and advocate for their voice to be heard throughout the whole process. We can also advocate for the seniors' needs through the meetings, helping with transportation, any interpretation services that could be needed, or any other needs that would make the seniors' involvement possible and more comfortable. And of course, throughout these meetings as well, we at CARIE can provide referrals to other departments at our organization, use resources in our victim advocacy programs such as victims' compensation or helping to fix a door or window due to an incident that occurred, and even further, providing referrals to other agencies and organizations in Philadelphia. So cases, right now we are going on a case-to-case basis for referrals for the program. The only instance or the only cases that would not be appropriate for restorative justice practices would be when the victim is experiencing abuse from the offending party, and it would not be safe for the victim and other party or parties to meet for one of these meetings. We don't want to further perpetuate a dangerous environment for a victim or individual or put them in a situation that would not be safe for them. So if we know and are aware that a victim is experiencing patterns of abuse or there's a power and control dynamic between the precipitating parties, we will want to screen for this, safety plan when appropriate, and then possibly refer the victim to a higher level of care and resources. So for RJ processes to be facilitated, the victim has to be willing and wanting to address the harm that has happened, and they have to be ready to meet with the other party involved to discuss the harm and hurt that has occurred. A big part of this as well is that the victim or individual would not want punishment for the offending parties or parties. This brings me to my next point, where the offending party or defendant must also be willing to participate and to some degree take accountability for the harm that they have caused. The principles of the restorative justice practices are focused around healing and accountability. So we want the offending party or parties to be aware of this and willing to take responsibility for what has happened in the relationship. So we have some examples at the bottom where RJ practices would be appropriate. As I previously mentioned, restorative justice can be beneficial for family relationships or family disagreements that are going on, any theft and financial issues, guardianship issues, caregiving, and long-term care issues as well. And then finally, housing and neighborhood conflicts are also something that could benefit, where a whole community can come together to discuss a harmful event and to heal and move forward to live safely in their own neighborhood. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sue to discuss restorative justice practices and the role play that's going to happen today.
Thanks. So restorative practices, as you can see, is sort of a large umbrella that involves a lot of different types of processes. And some people actually consider mediation a type of a restorative process. But today, and for the purposes of this project, we are sort of conceptualizing 3 different types of restorative processes. And the first one I'm going to talk about is actually the one in the middle, victim offender conference. And that's a situation where there's a clear, offender and a clear victim, maybe a theft. A theft is probably one of the clearest situations. Or vandalism, that's actually another one. There's a great training video somewhere that talks about some kids who sort of vandalize a neighbor's fence, put graffiti on the neighbor's fence. So that's a really clear victim and offender. And it's similar to mediation in the sense that there are usually only 2 participants, but it's different in the fact that this is not just a dispute between parties who might see things differently. This is a situation where a crime has generally occurred. But the point of the victim offender conference is to bring the parties together to talk about why did this occur, how has it impacted both of the parties, what might have led up to it. Often, but not always, there's some kind of a relationship between the parties in advance of the victim offender conference. For example, the example that I just gave of the neighborhood youth who spray painted a neighbor's fence. You know, they're neighbors. They have some sort of a relationship outside of this process or before any of this started. So it's an opportunity for the parties to sit down together and talk about what happened, how did it happen, how were the two parties impacted, what may be the consequences for the two parties, and what can the two of them do to repair any kind of harm or damage that has occurred and move forward in a positive way. So then the example I'm giving with the fence, you know, there's this physical damage to a physical object. So, you know, maybe the young folks will repaint the fence or clean the fence or something like that. Sometimes the harm is less tangible, I guess, and it's more of harm to a relationship, you know, sort of stress types of harm to an individual that may be psychological, let's say. So it's an opportunity for the parties to think about how to move forward. Sometimes the result of a victim offender conference will be some sort of an agreement or plan or apology. It really just depends on the situation. The second point here about being a safe, structured conversation, you know, as Shannon mentioned, this is only appropriate where both parties want to participate, and both parties are not debriefed, but they're engaged in conversation privately before they're brought in together, so that they really understand what's about to happen. And generally, if the offender doesn't take any responsibility for what has happened, it quite often is not going to be appropriate for this kind of a process. So let me move on to, and with victim offender conferences, we get referrals from CARIE, from the district attorney's office. This is generally something that's referred to us by the legal system, you know, the justice system. And then the next one I want to talk about is the family group conference. Sometimes it's called a community group conference. It doesn't have to literally be all family members. And this is similar, you know, where there's been some sort of harms, you know, somebody has done something that has negatively impacted one or more people, but the process brings together more than just the two parties, sort of with the theory that even though you've harmed my grandmother, it's still affecting me. So I want to be a part of the discussion to figure out, you know, how we can repair this harm. It's a process that usually talks about, you know, what are people's strengths and how can those strengths be used to, again, come up with some kind of a resolution. And again, the parties are all engaged in in conversation individually before the group is brought together. And it's similar to sort of a multi-party mediation or just a facilitated small group meeting. And then the last thing, and the one that we're going to demonstrate for you today, is the circle process. And it is similar to a family group conference, except it's a very structured conversation. The sort of hallmark of it is, first of all, that people sit around in a circle, unless they're sitting around in a virtual circle like we will be today. It's an old process that's been around for ever. And it's again an opportunity for everybody involved to provide their perspective on a situation and to discuss what does everybody need to move forward. The other hallmark I should have mentioned is that it involves a talking piece. We get a little creative when we're doing virtual circles with talking pieces because I can't literally hand my talking piece to the person next to me. but I can say I'm now handing the talking piece to whoever, and you'll see in the demonstration how we're going to handle that. Let's see, what else do I want to tell you about that? I think it's highly structured, but there is also some flexibility in terms of the focus, and how the discussion flow, what the topics of discussion are. And again, like the other two processes, some kind of a plan or agreement can be the result of all of these processes, an actual written plan or agreement, if that's what's appropriate. So let's see, I think Shannon, you need to flip to the next slide, or can I do that? Yeah. So here's how the restorative practices work in our office. We get a referral, we do an intake based on a referral. These are usually cases that are referred to us by some other organization. Although occasionally we get calls from just individuals out there who, for example, we just got a call the other day from a woman whose grandmother passed away a few years ago, and there's some conflict among the family members about a house that she left behind. So that might be something that, I haven't really done the intake yet, but that might be something that might involve a family group conference. The other thing I wanted to point out, and I should have said this, well, no, actually, I'll hold off on that. So we'll do an intake, as Shannon said, if after a case is referred to us, we will reach out to either the party, in these cases, in this partnership with CARIE, either the older adult that is referred to us, or at CARIE's discretion, we might reach out to the advocate, the CARIE advocate first, and figure out who are the appropriate parties, what's the situation that requires the restorative process. And then we will reach out to all of the parties who need to be involved. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll do these individual private conversations with all of them, so that as facilitators, we don't wind up in this group setting with a bunch of people who know each other and we don't know them, and some bombshell comes out. It's really helpful as a facilitator to be able to hear everybody's perspective before you actually get into the group situation. For those of you who are familiar with mediation practice, in a two-party mediation, we generally do not have these long private conversations ahead of time, because we often will do that during the mediation. We'll sort of take a time out and have a private conversation, which in mediator speak is called a caucus. But you can imagine how that would drag out this process for hours and hours and hours if we had to do that during the session with lots of people or multiple participants. So we do those conversations ahead of time, partly as a timing thing and partly as a way of getting at where everybody's going to be coming from. And it also, leading right to the next bullet, those conversations will help us determine what is the appropriate practice for this particular situation. The family group conference and the circle process, in my opinion, circles are really useful if there's a really high level of emotion. If it's a little more sort of a logistics concern and there's less emotion involved, a family group conference might work. Although when you're dealing with families, of course, as you can imagine, there's always going to be some level of emotion. But we often, when the case comes to us, we often will have some sense, just based on a brief description, what we think the appropriate process will be, but sometimes we'll change our mind on that after talking to the various parties. So then we'll get everybody together. You know, in the old days, pre-COVID, we would literally get everybody together in a room, either in a circle, which I'll describe the circle in a little more detail in just a minute, or somehow, you know, around a table. It might be if it's a family group conference, sort of just depends. And making sure that we have addressed any potential concerns of the individual parties, if they have any special accommodations need to be made. Of course, now we're doing sort of Zoom circles have become a thing. So they're looking a little bit different now, but even still, to the extent that people have the comfort level and the access to the technology, we can still do these virtually. And then we as facilitators will do whatever kind of preparation needs to be made. You know, it may involve sort of coming up with some questions to ask the parties, you know, figuring out the seating arrangement. If there's more than two parties, that can sometimes be really key. And although obviously not so much in Zoom, although with the Zoom, people obviously are sitting wherever they're sitting, but we will predetermine the order in which people are going to speak as if they were in a circle. So once we've done all the preparation, you know, then we have the actual process. So Shannon, if you want to move on to the next slide. Okay, so I just talked about the seating arrangement a little bit. And obviously with a circle, the seating arrangement is going to be in a circle. If it's a circle, we purposefully do not have anything like a table. We don't have people sitting behind tables. We just have them in chairs around a circle. And I already discussed sort of the importance or the potential importance of this order in which people will speak. Sometimes there's a centerpiece if there's some kind of physical object or objects that might be something that might make the parties feel comfortable, or that might signify their what it is that brings them together as a group. Not so much the conflict, but something that they can all relate to. We might have some kind of a centerpiece. Alternatively, it might just be sort of a decorative like cloth or floor covering to put at the bottom, to put in the center. And I'll explain in a minute why you might want to have that, even if you don't have any actual items on top of it. If it's virtual, then we don't have a centerpiece. Then, of course, the other key feature of the circle is the talking piece. And again, as I said, we try to pick something that, first of all, that you as a circle keeper are comfortable with, and something that sort of is pleasant to hold in your hand. It's kind of soothing to have something in your hand, and that is, you know, not too heavy, not too big. When we get started, I guess you'll see I have a little shell, but today a shell, a rock, you know, any kind of little object. And if we're doing a virtual circle, we will invite each individual to, if they'd like to bring their own talking piece that they can actually pick up and hold when they're talking, and then set it down next to them when they're not talking. And then the other key feature of the circle is the actual structure. You know, I mentioned this is a very structured conversation. So, whoops, hold on. So why don't we move now to the next slide, which gets a little bit more into the actual structure of the circle. So circles usually start with something called an opening ceremony. It's basically just a moment to mark the start of our time together, and sort of set aside everything that you might have figuratively brought in to this space with you. And now we're going to enter this process where we can talk about this incident. And I think I probably neglected to point out what we're talking about today are, for the most part, healing circles. The circle process is something that can be used for less emotional or less difficult situations. You can have a community building circle that's much more, that could be a little more upbeat, that doesn't have the heaviness that might be associated with a healing circle. So there are different types of circles, but I'm really concentrating today on healing circles. So this opening ceremony is usually, people can do all kinds of things. What I am most familiar with, or somebody might read part of a poem or do some kind of a mindfulness exercise or breathing exercises, something like that. Then there'll be an introduction round where everybody will go around, and the circle keeper will, which is what we call the facilitator in the circle process, will ask everybody to say something like, tell us your name, and there'll be some kind of a prompt, and you'll hear what we're going to actually show you this. How it could be as simple as, tell us how you're feeling today, tell us something that you enjoyed that you did today, things like that. Just a real quick check-in round where we go around the circle and everybody gets to do that. And this, for most of these rounds, until we get into sort of the meat of the, sorry if you're a vegetarian, of the issue. For most of these rounds, so to speak, the circle keeper will offer, will answer the prompt. My name is Sue and I'm feeling however way I'm feeling. Then there's usually a round where we talk about values. What kind of values are important for us to be mindful of, to hold during this time together. And in a circle that's being done in real life, we usually give out something like index cards, and everybody, as we go, we give people an opportunity to write something down on the index card. Then we pass the talking piece around, and everybody can share what's on their what they've written down and why it's important to them. And then everybody will put the index cards in the center of the circle. So that's why I mentioned earlier, it's nice to have something there that everybody can put their index cards on, even if it's just some kind of a like a cloth, or a tablecloth or a placemat or something like that. And then in addition to the values, we will often talk about guidelines. Usually the circle keeper will offer some guidelines that can be as simple as, keep in mind that when you have the talking piece, that's your opportunity to talk. And when you don't have the talking piece, that's your opportunity to listen. So, please respect the talking piece. We ask people if they want to add any kind of guidelines. Sometimes people will say, and sometimes we'll add things like, no raised voices. If it's important to you, you might ask people not to use curse words. Sometimes other people will add things like that. Sometimes people will say things like, be open-minded. You just never know what your participants are going to say. And then at this point, I often will usually tell the group that once we get into the actual prompts, or really at any time, if you don't feel like saying anything when the talking piece comes to you, you can pass. That's perfectly fine. As we like to say, passing is participating. You can just say, I'm going to pass, and you pass the talking piece to the next person. Generally, when that happens, the circle keeper will then have the talking piece go around a second time, because sometimes the person who passed changes their mind and decides they want to add something. And also sometimes people just want to respond to something that somebody already said. Sometimes we will tell people, when we'll keep passing the talking piece around until everybody has passed, and then we'll stop. But sometimes that can get a little out of hand. So that's not a hard and fast rule. Some circle keepers consider that to be a hard and fast rule. I don't generally, I have no problem stopping the talking piece, even if everybody contributed to the last round, just based on what people are saying and how I think the process needs to be moving along. And then we'll get into actual questions. And sometimes the first guided question is some kind of a storytelling round, where we'll ask people to tell us, to share some kind of story. And this is part of the preparation, where we as circle keepers will think about, what would be a nice thing for everybody to share, that everybody, sort of a universal experience or some kind of experience that everybody could relate to share, to just sort of get into the kind of groove of going around the circle and talking. So sometimes it might be something like, one I like to use is, tell us about an experience you had that you were dreading, but that you wound up really enjoying. And then the circle keeper will start, so here's my story. And they'll tell a story and then pass it around. And then after that round, we'll get into questions that really address the situation that brought us here together. And at a certain point during those questions, as a circle keeper, I usually have a whole bunch of questions at my disposal to use or not use, depending on how the circle goes and what people are saying. And toward the end of my list of questions is usually something like, some kind of question that brings us toward the moving forward part of this process. I'm going to explain a little bit more in just a minute. And then sometimes we take a break, like a literal break from the circle, and talk about, okay, so is there going to be an action plan? What's this action plan going to look like? Can we all agree to do certain things? And we might actually use a whiteboard or a flip chart and write things up. This is where it can help to have co-circle keepers. One person can sort of keep the order in the circle, and the other person can be writing things down. And then we come back into the circle. The circle keeper will just sort of sum up, okay, here's what the agreement is. We'll have some kind of a checkout round. How are you feeling now? Everybody can just share, one thing about just one word maybe to describe how you're feeling now. And then we do some kind of a closing ceremony, which again can be a poem or a breathing exercise or a mindfulness or a meditation, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide, and I'll tell you what we're going to do today. So we're going to do, as we've indicated, we're going to do a mock circle. This is a financial exploitation case. I'm going to play the circle keeper, so I will have spoken to all of these folks ahead of time, so I know more than this. But for the purposes of this demonstration, what you will know is that there's an older adult, Sally, whose grandson, Isaac, quote, borrowed her debit card and has been taking money out of her account. And then it's come to light, but she doesn't want to, which could be considered, this is financial exploitation. Sally doesn't want to press any charges. After all, this is her grandson. She loves him. She doesn't want to see him having any kind of record. And Sally's 2 adult children will be participating. Her daughter, Mel, who lives out of town, and her son, Max, who is Isaac's father. So what we're not going to show you is everything that I did before we entered the room and sat down around the circle. All that preparation that I mentioned. We're not going to do that values round that I mentioned, just for time's sake. I mentioned that if someone passes, none of our participants today are going to pass, just because this is theater, this isn't real life. So I've asked them to share something, so that we're just going to do 1 round for each question. We're not going to do these multiple rounds that I was talking about. Although if this were a real circle, I probably would be doing multiple rounds with some of these questions. And we're not going to do that timeout, that breaking of the circle to do the planning and writing up. Although you will see, we will take a little time out, where we'll sort of break, sort of get out of character, and I will explain, what I think the agreement or the plan or whatever would look like if we were going to be writing something up, but we're not going to actually do that. And then we'll do the rest, the checkout round and the closing. And I think, so wait, before we go to the next. Right, okay. So I have, I've come up with an order for the case. And if this were a real virtual circle, I would have to explain that to the participants. So I'll explain that to the participants, and then you'll see that. So yeah, I think Shannon, you need to, let's see, how does this work? There we go. Now we're all in the circle. So then I'm just going to turn my fan on. Okay. Okay. Oops. Hi. It's kind of weird talking without seeing yourself or anybody. Okay, so let's just get started. Well, before we get started, let me as myself, not the circle keeper, me as the panelist, I'm going to let you know, maybe when I say, well, I think everybody can see the names on the screens there. So you can see, and when I say your name, if you want to just wave to the audience. So Sally is the grandmother, and Isaac is her grandson. Max is Isaac's father. Mel, and Sally's son. Mel is Sally's daughter. And Katie is the advocate. So Katie in real life and in this role play is an advocate at CARIE. So the case would have come in and she would have been working with Sally in advance. In this particular role play, we are going to have Katie at the circle. I'm always wanting to say at the table because that's what we say in mediation, but there is no table with circles. But Katie will be present at the circle with Sally. And that's a decision that the advocate can participate in the restorative practice in whatever, we sort of defer to CARIE because they've developed a relationship with the older adult. So we let them call the shot on that if they want to, usually at a minimum, they might be present when we do that initial private conversation. But in this instance, Katie will be here with Sally. So, okay, so let me just take a sip of water. Okay. Okay, so let's get started. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so glad that you've all decided to participate in this circle, and it's nice to see all of you together. I enjoyed the opportunity to talk to all of you ahead of time. And as you know, we're participating today in a process called the circle. This is an opportunity for everybody to have an opportunity to express whatever it is they want to talk about the incident that has brought us together, or the incidents, the situation that has brought us all together today. This is what's called a circle, and if we were doing this in real life, we would literally be sitting around a circle and everybody would have an opportunity to speak in the order in which they're speaking. I mean, in the order in which they're sitting. So imagine, if you will, that you're sitting in a circle, and next to me in the circle, and if you all want to make a note of this so you'll know who you're speaking before and after. So after I speak, Sally will speak. This is the order of the circle. Next to Sally is Katie. Next to Katie is Isaac. Next to Isaac is Mel. And next to Mel is Max. And that would close up the circle. So I would be next to Max. In a circle, the person who's talking will be, in a real life circle, is holding a talking piece. There you go, I think you can see it now. I'm using a shell today. If you have a talking piece with you, that's fine. If you don't, that's okay too. So in a real circle, when I was done talking, I would hand the talking piece to Sally. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to say, I'm now handing Sally the talking piece. So Sally, when you finish talking, when we get to the point where we're going around the circle, you'll have an opportunity to speak, and then you'll say, I'm passing the talking piece to Katie, and so on around the circle. When the talking piece comes to you, if you don't feel like saying anything at that moment, that's fine, you can pass. But just a reminder, out of character, don't pass for purposes of this demonstration. That's fine to pass. The talking piece will go around a second time, and perhaps even a third if it's necessary. You're all here because you've chosen to be here. This is a voluntary process. It's confidential. What's said in here stays in here. I, as a circle keeper, am not going to repeat anything that I've heard in here outside of here. I will probably report back to CARIE, well, Katie is here, so she'll know, to let them know that the process was completed. So we'll like I said, we'll have an opportunity to talk about whatever's important to you with regard to the events that brought us here together. One more thing I just want to mention about the talking piece, which may be real or imagined in your individual cases. When you have the talking piece, that's your opportunity to talk. So I would like to ask everybody else who doesn't have the talking piece to use that as your opportunity to listen. And we'll go around like that. So before we get started, I just want to do a really little brief sharing with you. I just want to share a little poem, or really just a couple of lines from a Rumi poem that you might be familiar with. I think it's called The Field. So here's how it goes. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. So if you've heard that before, I hope you enjoyed hearing it again. And if you haven't, I hope you enjoyed hearing it for the first time. So we're going to go around and do just a little introductions, really more for me, because I know that you all know each other. Most of you are family, with the exception of Katie. As I said, my name is Sue, and I'd like us all to share something that happened to you in the past week that made you smile. So as I said, my name is Sue, and something that happened in the last week that made me smile was that I was able to pick a bunch of plums off of a plum tree in my neighborhood and make plum jam. And that made me really happy because now I can share it with my friends. So I'm going to pass the talking piece to Sally. And Sally, if you'd like to just share with us something that made you smile this past week.
Okay, my name is Sally, and I guess what made me really happy was the other day I was looking out my window on the street where I live in South Philadelphia, and it was really hot, and I was able to see some of the neighborhood kids playing around in the fire hydrant sprinkler. Oh, and I guess I'm passing my talking piece on to Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah, so my name is Katie. I'm a restorative justice advocate at CARIE. Something that made me smile this week was one of my plants, my snake plant, started growing a little offshoot. So I'm excited to have a second snake plant growing there. And I will pass to Isaac.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Isaac. Something that made me smile this week, made me happy, I guess, was being able to just go out on a nice walk early in the morning. It's nice and quiet. I'm sorry. I will pass the talking piece to Mel.
Hi there, my name is Mel, and something that made me smile this week is that my wife and we finally finished all of our paperwork for our adoption.
You want to pass the talking piece?
I do. I want to pass the talking piece to Max.
Thank you for this talking piece. Hi, everyone. My name is Max. And something that made me smile the last 2 weeks is I got a day off. That was a rare occurrence since I worked 2 jobs. And it was just nice to have a day off. So I'm going to pass this talking piece back to you, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you, Max. So now we would do a values round, but as I said earlier, we're not going to do that for purposes of this demonstration. I'll just share with all of you that in a circle, we just like to have some guidelines. I've really already discussed the most important guideline, which is, and which we've now just had some practice with. When you have the talking piece, it's your opportunity to talk, and then you'll pass it on to the next person. Is there anything, and you know, we're all, as I mentioned, we're all here because we want to be here today, and so I'm hoping that we can have a productive conversation. Are there any guidelines that anybody else would like to add? I'd like to just say, you know, you can speak for as long as you need to speak in response to the topics that we're discussing. You can pass if you want to pass. And because we're on Zoom, even there may be a few occasions where I might say something, even if I don't have the talking piece, you know, just to remind you to pass it or something, since I can't really do that with body language as well, since we're not all together. or if there's a problem with technology, I might speak out of turn, and I apologize for that in advance. But this is the problems of technology, the challenges, I should say, of technology. So does anybody else have any guidelines that they'd like to add? I'm seeing a bunch of heads shaking. Okay, great. So let's move on forward. So first of all, I'd like to ask everybody to share with us, how have you been feeling about the situation that brought us all together today? So I'll pass the talking piece to Sally, and you can share that with us.
Okay, well, I guess starting off, I'm just really embarrassed to think that my grandson ended up in this situation. I really appreciate Isaac. He comes to visit me as much as he does. It's not what you might expect from an average 23-year-old, but he's been very helpful in coming by and checking on me. But I'm just, at the same time, I'm sort of sad that my son and my daughter don't seem to get along. So that's been a problem. I know, having Parkinson's now, or beginning to get it, that I know I need help, and I don't move as fast as I used to. But sometimes I really think my family's getting a little overprotective. I mean, having Parkinson's is not a death sentence. It may make it harder to take care of things at home, and I get frustrated when I can't say things the way I want to. So that's one thing I'm feeling. And the other thing, I don't quite understand how Mel could get these people, Katie, what was it? The Office of Protection for Older People or something, to look at my bank account. Is that right? I don't know. I didn't really understand how that happened. So that's what I'm feeling, and I'll pass my talking piece over to Katie. Maybe she can explain.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Sally. I appreciate so much your kind of honesty and your presence that you're bringing with this. And your vulnerability with this really hard situation. Yeah, so as Older Adult Protective Services, yeah, I think that there may have been an investigation of some sort around that. But yeah, I want to say that for me, I'm grateful to that you and your family decided to try to address this through restorative justice. And I'm just looking forward to this process. And again, Sally, if there is something that you need to sort of check in or have explained or anything for me, let me know, and we can do a sidebar and you and I can talk, definitely. So I will pass to Isaac.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel bad about this entire thing. I feel ashamed. When I graduated, back in May, it's been hard finding a job. I've been behind on rent and everything, and with all of that happening, the first time that I took the debit card, it was $200, and I'd asked permission, and Grandma said it was okay, and I didn't think it was a big thing. And the next time, I just didn't ask. I didn't think I felt embarrassed to ask, and I didn't think that she'd mind, and I figured that I'd have a job soon, would be able to pay her back, and so when I had gotten a call, and Mel was mad at me and was yelling at me, I was surprised that I was getting that, because I didn't see it like that. I mean, I can see how, like, if somebody hears it for the first time, like, you know, I took all this money from her, but at the time it didn't feel that way. And you know, I'm the only one who was, like Grandma said, like, I was the one who was visiting, I was the one who was taking care, and that's not to say that I didn't do anything wrong. I recognize that. But yeah, so since then it's been hard, and I do feel bad, and you know, things have been more distant with Grandma than they had been previously, and yeah, so that's all I have to say. I'll pass the talking piece to Mel.
Look, you know, I don't know what everybody expects of me. You know, I was behind in checking the finances because I have like things going on. And I noticed that there's a ton of money that's missing. So, like, what else am I supposed to do? Of course, I'm going to call the bank and I'm going to try and find out what's going on. And of course, they're going to call Older Adult Protective Services. And to be honest with you, I'm mad. I'm mad at you, Max, for not having good control over your kid. And Isaac, I'm mad at you for taking advantage of a person who doesn't have the ability to speak up on her own behalf. This should
Why
have never
didn't you
happened.
call me first, Mel? Why, it's my money. Why didn't you call me?
Why don't we, Sally, why don't we let Mel finish, and then we'll get back around.
Okay.
And we can address those questions when we come back around.
I'm going to pass the speaking thing over to Max.
Thanks.
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about this. First, I'm mortified about the whole situation. I'm also embarrassed, you know, ashamed. I feel humiliated. But I will always love my son. Isaac is a great boy, and I feel protective over him. I don't think we should be all ganging up on Isaac. I'm glad we're here to talk about it. And, you know, lastly, I feel abandoned. Mel, you know, you haven't been around. And here you are calling the authorities. I feel abandoned in a few ways. And that's how I feel. I'll pass it back to you soon.
Thanks, Max. Well, I want to thank all of you for sharing your what clearly is heartfelt feelings. I can see that it appears that you're a pretty tight-knit family, and you know, I'm hearing similar, I guess I want to say, pain from all of you about this difficult situation. And I'm sensing that, you know, you do want to, you know, address it head on and move forward. Before we get to the next question, I just want to take a moment to see if Sally, if Sally and Katie want to just either have a sidebar, or if there's a question that needs to come up. It sounded like do you want to take a sidebar, Katie, for just a second? I mean, or just pretend that you're taking a sidebar.
Yeah, so Sally, I just wanted to quickly check in. I think you were raising some important things about how, I mean, this is your life, this is your money, and you should be included in these things. And I heard you say that, and I just want to make sure that that's part of this conversation.
Okay. All right.
How are you feeling right now about, you feeling okay?
Yeah, I'm still a little annoyed with Mel for having contacted those people, but we'll see.
And just for the audience, just so you know, that would have been, you know, if this were a Zoom if this were really a Zoom circle, we would have like put them in a breakout room. If it was in real life, you know, that would have been done in private, not in front of the rest of us. So, okay. So now I'm going to ask you all to talk about how this situation has affected your life, you know, since the incident happened. And you've shared how you're feeling. You know, is there anything else you want to share about how it's affected your life? So I'll pass my talking piece to Sally.
Okay. I guess it's, you know, it's really hard for me realizing that my abilities are diminishing without having this added stress. And I guess I'm really afraid that my family will decide I can't take care of myself and stay in my home here in South Philadelphia. So, you know, sometimes I don't remember things as well as I used to. I mean, you know, remember when I used to work for that organization and I used to keep all the office business organized in my mind. But I just can't seem to do that anymore. And certainly, you know, I have a limited amount of money to live on each month. So you know, it's hard. I mean, I don't have as much as I really need. And I guess I'm still feeling sad that we hardly ever see Mel around here. I mean, she moved away to California and hardly ever see her anymore. So that's really how it's affected me. So I guess, Katie, here's the talking stick for you.
I'm not going to say much. I'll mostly pass, but I just want to make sure that, you know, when we're having this conversation, we're remembering that, you know, Sally was harmed with this and needs to be very much a part of the process and the decisions that are made around her life, her money, things like that. So that's sort of all I have. And then I'll pass to Isaac.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you know, since this happened, since, you know, we started conflicting about this, I haven't even been over to visit Sally. I have, you know, things are different with you know, everybody in the family, and that feeling that like everyone that everyone, you know, is doesn't want anything to do with you or is mad or so it definitely changes things, or, you know, makes things different than they were, and I do want to set things right as best as I can, but yeah. So that's all I've got to say. I'll pass the talking piece to Mel.
You know, I'm not going to lie. I mean, this has been just like a really stressful situation, you know? So it's like really, really hard for me to try and, you know, like do the right thing and be the, you know, the good daughter when I'm living so far away. And, you know, I'm sorry that I did that. I'm sorry that I moved so far away, and I feel like a lot of guilt around that. But you know, I moved there to a place where I'm like really respected, and you know, I have a great set of friends who just, you know, love me and my wife for who we are. And that's something that I just didn't have in South Philly. So I'm really sorry that, you know, it makes me sad to hear that, Mom. You know, that really has affected you in such a, you know, a big way. And I am, you know, it makes me sad that I didn't even consider talking to you first about that I just jumped and just automatically assumed that, you know, due to your Parkinson's, that you wouldn't know what was going on. And you know, I am really sad about that, and I'm sorry.
All right. Yeah, so this has affected me in various ways. It's heartbreaking to see my son losing confidence and, you know, feeling so down all the time. Love you, Isaac. You're going to be all right. We're going to get through this. And, you know, that's really affecting me. You know, he made a mistake. It's, you know, I don't think we should be demonizing him. You know, it's affected me in other ways. I'm trying to spend more time with mom since I'm the only kid of hers who's around. So I'm trying to see mom more, but it's really hard. I have 2 jobs I'm balancing. I got 3 kids. I'm a single dad. You know, my wife died 3 years ago, and I don't have the bandwidth for this situation. I'm trying to deal with it, but we really need your help back here, Mel. You know, it's like, it's time we all, you know, get together here in Philly, South Philly, where we're from. That's where we belong. South Philly.
Okay, thank you, Max. I'm going to break character for just a second in the interest of time. And what we would ordinarily do was, I mean, as you can see, a lot has come out. So we would probably do many more rounds sort of on this, just passing the talking stick. Is there anything you'd like to add? Is there anything you'd like to add? Because so much just came out there. And then we would move forward with a question. The question that I would probably pose would be something like, and let's just skip it because of the time. What do you need to move forward? And, you know, folks would talk about, you know, I don't know, Sally might need Mel to call more often or something. I'm just making this up. You never know what people are saying. And then after that, we would do a round of, you know, so what do you think you can offer to help this, to move this situation forward, and to repair any of the harms, you know, that had come out in the discussion. And then we'd probably take a break, and I might write some things up. We'd write up an agreement. But in the interest of time, we're going to skip all of that and just go straight to the checkout round. So imagine for a moment, if you will, that this family has been able to, and they already have, like really, really touchingly, you know, put themselves out to each other. And so just imagine that they've now taken that a little bit further and moved forward and come up with some sort of plan. You know, maybe Isaac will come up with a payment plan, and Mel will, you know, he and Isaac will get together and visit grandma together more often or something. I'm really just making things up. You never know. You know, that's the beauty of these processes, is that the participants figure out what the plan is. So what I'm making up on the spot might have nothing to do with what will work for this family. I'm just trying to give an illustration. Okay, so let's just do a checkout round. Okay, let's go back into character. Well, thank you all. I hope that you're feeling like this was a useful and productive time for all of you today and for your family as a group. And in the little bit of time that we have left, I'd just like to pass around the talking piece one last time and see if there's just one word you'd like to share that sort of sums up how are you feeling right now. And I'll start. I'm just feeling really honored to be with all of you today and to experience your honesty and openness and caring for each other. Sally?
Okay, well, I guess, Mel, it's really nice to finally see your face. I mean, occasionally we've talked on the telephone, but to see your face, not so sure I like the hairdo, but the face, it's good to see. So hope we can keep in touch.
You want to pass the talk?
Oh, I'm sorry, passing it on to Katie.
Okay. The word, I'll also use Sue's word, honored. I'm honored that you know, that Sally and the rest of your family have decided to be in this space. I'm honored to have been working with you, Sally. And yeah, just thank you everyone for being a part of this process. And then I'll pass to Isaac.
Thank you. I guess the word I'm feeling most now is sorry. Grandma, I haven't been over since then, and I think some of it was I just didn't know how to say that I'm sorry, and I am sorry. And if it would be okay with you, I would be happy to, or I'd really want to be able to, you know, still be there for you, and do want to be able to pay you back as soon as I can. But sorry was what I'm feeling. So I'll pass the talking piece to Mel.
The word that I'd like to use is gratitude for having a family who's willing to, you know, do this work. So I heard you, and I'm going to do my part, and you know, and thank you. And I'm going to pass the baton on to Max.
Thank you, everybody. My word is hopeful. I'm really glad we got a chance to connect here. And, you know, this has been hard on all of us. I just really hope that we can move to a better place together, and I'm feeling optimistic. So.
Thank you. So just in closing, you know, again, I'd like to thank all of you for sharing this time and this space, and for the hard work that you've done to address the situation that brought us in here together. And again, I'm just deeply moved and honored to have been a part of this with your family. And before we all get up and go our separate ways, maybe we could all just sit up in our chairs and take a couple of deep breaths. So sort of all together now, let's breathe in and feel the breath move going in, down your lungs, down, 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 maybe even down your legs, all the way down to your toes. Hold it for just a second and let it all release. Thank you all. And here, you know, we'll have copies of your agreement that you came up with, and we'll email them to you. Okay, that's the end of the role play. Shannon, did you want to put that last couple of slides up? We had some, okay, we'll just go straight to the Q&A. You wanna, looks like there's some questions. I'm gonna turn it back to you, Shannon, right?
Yes. So the first question we have is, what role does the legal system play within the program?
Oh, Katie, you wanna take that, or do you want?
Yeah, so I mean, this program is coming out of PAVE, which stands for Providing Advocacy for Victimized Elderly. It's a program at CARIE. So we, you know, it came out of working with crime victims and crime witnesses in court, older adult crime victims and crime witnesses who basically were not, you know, a lot of the people that we were working with were not quite always getting kind of the justice that they were looking for. Which is often, you know, in the criminal legal system, it's not always actually about justice. Sometimes it ends up being about other things. And to be honest, like often the people who are victimized and harmed are not centered always in the process. So this came kind of from a grant to address that. And that's when Shannon and I came on last year in August to work on it, to be victim advocates, but also to build up this program. So I think there's definitely an element of, you know, a lot of the referrals that we're getting, you know, they're from other victim advocates at CARIE or from the DA's office, other places like that. So there is a relationship with the legal system, and we've been in ongoing conversation. And I see there's some people from the DA's office actually in this webinar watching. So we've been working with them a bit as well. And I know that also Good Shepherd has a relationship with the DA's office too. So there certainly that element is there, but it doesn't have to be, you know, not all of the processes have to be from a legal issue at all. Like it can be, you know, it can be there's, you know, a conflict that's popping up or a big decision that needs to be made. You know, even this scenario outside of, you know, if no harm hadn't occurred, if Isaac hadn't stole money, but maybe, you know, maybe Sally has been working with a social worker and trying to figure out how to get the right support she needs, things like that. This process could certainly lend itself to just kind of making basic decision making and addressing harm that has nothing, you know, harm for which there is no, you know, involvement with the criminal legal system. So I don't know if Sue or Shannon, you have any other thoughts, but those are my thoughts. Okay.
Okay, next question is, during the coronavirus pandemic, how is this program currently operating?
Sue, do you want to take that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we have done sort of the way you just saw. You know, if people have the capacity, we did a case that sort of came in as a victim offender conference that we just did by conference call because there were just 2 of them, and I guess the one of them wasn't comfortable with Zoom. But you know, whereas we would have really just the way you're saying, we're continuing to do all of the work we do at Good Shepherd, whether it's mediations, restorative practices, trainings. We've really shifted gears. I just want to take a moment to thank the the actors. You all were great. I felt like I was in a real circle. It can be done. It can be hard, but it can be done.
Okay, and then I guess for the interest of time, we'll just do one more. And where can these processes be held? Is this flexible?
Yes, the short answer is, you know, when we do get back to the point where we can meet in person, we like to have the processes, we like to do these in a neutral place, so we don't really like to go to one participant's home. We will occasionally, we are flexible with that rule if necessary because of somebody's, you know, physical needs or, you know, inability to travel. So occasionally we'll go to an older adult's home. We prefer not to because we like the physical space to be a neutral space, but we are very sensitive to providing whatever accommodations are necessary in order for all parties to be able to participate in the process.
There were also a couple of questions that popped up in the chat that I just saw. So one of them was about if we've had any mediations or processes as a condition of a criminal sentence. And I know that we haven't through CARIE, we haven't done that, but we're very open to doing that. And I don't know if, Sue, if you've had other outside of this program, if you at Good Shepherd have had any, you know, mediations or restorative justice processes referred to you as a condition of a criminal sentence.
I don't know if as a condition of is the appropriate terminology, but we do have like victim offender potential cases referred to us. I'm just not as savvy about, as you said, the criminal legal system, you know, and to what extent it's, you know, participation is, mandatory. But we do have cases referred to us from the district attorney's office.
And then oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, usually the cases that come from the district attorney are not involving older adults. The cases that involve older adults are coming from CARIE.
And then there was just one last question. I just wanted to make sure that we got to the ones that were in the chat. One last question asking if we'd send the PowerPoint with the contact info. And I think we were definitely, we were planning at least on doing that, but also potentially sending out the recording as well. But yeah, we can send out contact info too. Yeah, so Shannon, I didn't know if there's any other questions or anything else to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think that was it, Katie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we can start to wrap things up. If anyone has any questions or anything comes up later for you, you can always email us or call us. I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar today and taking the time to learn about our program. And like Katie said, we'll be sending out the PowerPoint and the recording of the webinar as well this week to all the participants. But again, thank you everyone, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.